Welcome to today's episode of the Deep Dive Credit Podcast, presented by Elite Credit Solutions. We are your trusted partner in affordable credit repair, proudly based in Tampa, Florida, and dedicated to serving clients across the entire United States. Join us as we explore the intricacies of credit management, share expert insights, and empower you with the knowledge you need to achieve your financial goals. Get ready for an enlightening journey into the world of credit. Let's dive in.
All right, let's dive into this whole car insurance thing. Specifically, no fault and at fault. I mean, we all have it, car insurance. But do we really know how different things could be after an accident? All depending on where we live,
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Like, I was reading that Michigan has some of the highest average car insurance premiums in the whole U.S.
Mm.
And guess what? They're a no-fault state. Makes you wonder if there's like a connection, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then what happens if you have a fender bender somewhere that you can't sue the other person? Even if they were totally at fault. Like, what if they were texting and ran a red light?
Right.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. So to help us break it all down,
Mm-hmm.
we have our expert here who knows this stuff inside and out.
Well, it really is interesting. Car insurance is something we all have to deal with, but most of us don't really get it, the nuances, until unfortunately something happens.
Exactly.
So let's just start by, unpacking the fundamental difference between no fault and at fault. In a no fault system, if you get hurt in an accident, you just file a claim with your own insurance. It doesn't matter who caused the crash.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to streamline things and get you medical attention faster.
So it's like less hassle.
Right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, at fault is all about the person who is responsible. Their insurance has to cover the costs for anyone who is injured. So you can see right away how your experience could be very different based on where you live.
Okay, so at first it just sounds like it's about who pays the bills.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that make insurance companies in no-fault states maybe fight harder against paying claims since it's their money right away?
That's a great point, and it's definitely something critics of no fault bring up. The idea is that since the insurance company has to pay right away, they might be more likely to try to get out of paying or pay as little as possible.
Oh, I see.
But whether that's really how it works is debatable. It probably depends on the company and the situation,
So it's not like this perfect system where no fault means everyone's taken care of, no questions asked.
You got it, yeah. It's complicated, and there are pros and cons to both, and neither one is perfect, really.
Right, that makes sense. So, okay, we know who files the claim,
Mm-hmm.
but what exactly does each type of insurance cover? I mean, obviously medical bills, but what about, say, lost wages if you can't work because of your injuries?
Great question. That's actually a key difference.
Mm-hmm.
In no-fault states, your own PIP, that's personal injury protection, that often covers lost wages. So if your doctor says you can't work, your insurance will replace some of the money you're losing.
Okay.
But with at fault, it's not so straightforward. You might have to sue the other driver to get your lost wages back, or you would have needed to have bought specific coverage for that.
Wait, sue. I thought the whole point of no fault was to avoid lawsuits.
Yeah, that is the goal, to
Yeah.
reduce them. But it's not like a total ban. Most no-fault states have thresholds.
Okay.
For instance, if your injuries are super serious, like if you have a permanent disability or disfigurement,
Oh, wow.
or if your bills go way over a certain limit, then you might be able to sue.
So it's like you have a limited right to sue in those states.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding a balance, giving quick coverage for most accidents, but still allowing for lawsuits in the most serious cases. And going back to what you said before, even in at-fault states, you might have to go to court if the other driver isn't insured or they don't have enough insurance.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Okay.
Okay, so what about damage to the cars themselves? Does either system cover that automatically?
No, neither of them do. Think of it this way. Medical costs are for people, right? And damage to the cars, that's property damage. That's where collision and liability coverage come in. Collision covers your own vehicle no matter who's at fault, and liability covers damage you caused to other people's property.
So no matter what, those are important.
Oh, yeah. Crucial in both no-fault and at-fault states to protect yourself.
Okay, so we've talked about these systems in general, but I'm sure it gets more complicated when you look at each state and their laws, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's a real patchwork out there. Some are strictly no fault, some are strictly at fault, and some even let you choose. It's like each state is doing its own experiment to see what works best.
Uh-huh. Right. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Our research showed 9 states that require no fault.
Right.
Florida, Hawaii, Kansas, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, North Dakota, and Utah. So that means if you live there, no fault is your only
Yeah,
option.
that's right. You're automatically in the no-fault system with PIP and all that, and the limits on lawsuits. But there are some exceptions. It's interesting.
Heck.
Delaware, Maryland, and Oregon. Technically, they're at fault states, but they still make drivers have PIP, which is usually a no-fault thing.
So even though they figure out who's at fault, everyone still has some coverage for their own medical bills.
Right, exactly. It's kind of a mix, both systems, which just shows how complicated this whole thing can be.
Yeah. Okay, starting to get it a little bit. But I bet there are more twists and turns. We'll be back in part 2 to go through some examples, real-life situations. We'll see how these different types of insurance actually work when accidents happen. Okay, so part 1. We got the basics down, but now I kind of want to get into the nitty-gritty, like some real-world examples.
Yeah.
How does all this play out when someone actually gets into an accident?
Right.
Can we do that?
Sure, absolutely. I think that always helps make things clearer. So, let's say you're driving in Florida, nice and sunny Florida.
Okay.
Remember, Florida is a no-fault state, and bam, someone rear-ends you. You're at a stoplight, so not your fault.
Right.
You end up with some whiplash. You need physical therapy for a few weeks.
Oof, not a great souvenir.
Yeah. No, not fun. But here's where that no-fault thing kicks in. You file a claim with your insurance company, and that PIP coverage, remember personal injury protection, that'll cover your medical bills and the wages you lost from not being able to work.
Oh, that's pretty convenient. So even though it was the other person's fault, I don't have to mess with their insurance at all.
Yeah, that's the main idea, yep. It's supposed to be efficient, make things easy, get you the care you need faster. You don't have to wait to figure out who's at fault.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if that same accident, same rear-ending, happened in, let's say, California?
Okay, California. Yeah, well, California's an at-fault state. So in that case, you'd file the claim with the other driver's insurance because they were the one who hit you.
Okay.
And then their liability coverage would cover all your expenses and damages.
Now, see, that's where it feels kind of risky. Like, in Florida, you're covered no matter what. But in California, it depends on the other person. What if they don't have good insurance? Or any insurance at all?
Yeah, that is one of the big things to think about when you're comparing these two systems. In an at-fault state, if that other driver isn't insured or doesn't have enough, you're kind of stuck. You might have to use your own uninsured or underinsured coverage. And that is, I strongly suggest you have that. Or you might even have to, sue them to get all your money back.
Sue. But I thought no fault was the one where you didn't sue.
Well, yeah, it is supposed to reduce lawsuits, but not totally get rid of them. And remember, even in those at-fault states, people still sue sometimes, especially when there are really bad injuries or they can't agree on who's at fault. So it's always good to know your legal options, wherever you live.
Okay, so it's not that black and white. It's not like one system has lawsuits and the other doesn't. All right, let's go back to California for a minute.
Okay.
That at-fault state. What if, in that rear-ending, it wasn't just whiplash, what if I needed surgery and months of physical therapy? Would their insurance actually cover all of that?
That's a really important question. And yeah, those liability coverages do have limits, but how much they cover, that can be really different. It depends on the policy and what state you're in. Some policies might only cover $50,000 per person, while others $300,000 or even more.
Oh, wow.
So if your costs go over the other driver's limit, then things get a little messy.
So it is kind of a gamble then. You're just hoping the other person has enough.
Yeah, you could say that. It's definitely a risk you take when you're in an at-fault state. That's why it's so important to know your own limits and think about stuff like umbrella insurance. That gives you extra liability protection, beyond what you normally have.
Umbrella insurance.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting. Maybe we could do a whole deep dive on that sometime.
Yeah, we could do that. Always up for more insurance, deep dives.
Awesome. All right, let's switch it up. What happens if I'm the one who causes the accident?
Okay, so let's say you're in a no-fault state.
Yeah.
Your PIP, it would still cover you, your own medical expenses and lost wages, up to your limit, of course.
Right.
The other driver would do the same, file a claim with their own insurance. Because remember, no fault, everyone goes to their own insurance first.
Got it, yeah. But what about the damage I caused to their car?
That's where your liability coverage comes in.
Okay.
Your insurance company would handle their claim and pay for their car to get fixed. Again, up to your limit.
Gotcha. And in an at-fault state.
At-fault state, if you're the one at fault, then your liability coverage pays for the other driver, their medical bills and car repairs. But up to your limit. And here's the thing. Your own injuries and damage wouldn't be covered unless you had, med pay or collision coverage.
Oh, so it's like a double whammy. You have to pay for them and you have to take care of your own costs separately.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good reminder to be careful out there, drive safe.
Yeah.
Not just to avoid accidents, but to avoid all those costs, too.
For sure, yeah. Okay, so we talked about lawsuits before, but can we go a little deeper into that? Like, in a no-fault state, are there times when you can sue, even if your injuries aren't that bad?
Yeah, we did touch on that. And it is important to understand that even with no fault, you can't always sue. But there are exceptions, like some states, if your medical bills cost more than a certain amount, or your injuries are really bad, like broken bones or scars or something, then you can sue.
Okay.
So, yeah, even with no fault, sometimes you still end up in court.
Interesting. So it really depends on the state and all the little rules, huh?
Yeah, it can be really complicated. So it's always best to talk to a lawyer, especially if you're in a no-fault state, just to make sure you know what you can do.
Good advice. All right, let's talk MedPay again. It's usually optional, but when is it a good idea to have both MedPay and PIP? They kind of sound like they cover the same stuff, right?
Yeah, people ask about that a lot, and it is a good question. It might seem like having both is overkill, but sometimes it's actually smart.
Right.
Like, what if you have a really high deductible on your health insurance?
Right.
Then MedPay can be helpful. It can cover those first medical bills, before your health insurance kicks in.
So it's like a safety net?
Exactly, a safety net. Gives you some peace of mind knowing you're covered, especially right after an accident. And don't forget, MedPay can also cover people riding in your car, too.
Oh, so that's good. Okay, what about those choice no-fault states? Kentucky, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The ones where you get to choose between no fault and at fault. What should I think about if I live there? I mean, that's a big choice.
It is a big decision, so you really want to think about it carefully. The main thing is, how do you feel about, the different things each system offers? Like, are you more worried about having easy access to coverage right away, even if you might not be able to sue?
Yeah.
Or do you want that traditional at-fault system where you can sue, but it might take longer to get everything paid for?
It's like choosing between, like, the sure thing or taking a chance at something bigger, huh?
Exactly. It's about what's important to you and how much risk you're comfortable with.
Got it. Okay, last question about all this, and we got to move on. Does one system usually cost more than the other?
That's hard to say. It depends on a lot of things, like your driving record, what kind of car you have, how old you are, where you live, and what kind of insurance system your state uses.
Okay.
But overall, no fault can be a bit pricier because it covers more, especially with that PIP. But it's always good to shop around and compare, get quotes from different companies, see what works for your budget.
Right. Good advice. All right, we've gone over a lot here. When we come back for the last part of this deep dive, we're going to look at the bigger picture. Like, how does all this affect healthcare costs? And what about the legal system? Stay tuned. And we're back for the last part of our car insurance deep dive. It's been a wild ride so far, from no fault versus at fault, real life accidents, and now we're looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm realizing car insurance is way more than just about protecting your car.
Right. It's really interesting how it all connects to, like, healthcare costs and even lawyers and lawsuits.
Yeah, and like, as a society, how we decide who has to pay when accidents happen. So, I was reading some experts think that no-fault insurance could actually help keep healthcare costs down. The idea is, since there are fewer lawsuits and it's easier to pay medical bills, it takes some pressure off healthcare providers.
Right.
And then that could mean lower costs for everybody. Does that make sense?
It does. And there's actually some proof that it works that way. Think about it. Lawsuits get really expensive fast. You have lawyer fees, court costs, experts. It all adds up.
Yeah.
So no fault, with fewer lawsuits, it could free up money in the healthcare system. So providers could focus more on patients and less on fighting in court.
So less money for lawyers, more money for treatment.
Right.
But it's probably not that simple, is it?
Well, of course not. Haha, there are always different sides to everything. Some people who don't like no fault, they worry that it could actually make healthcare more expensive.
Oh, how so?
Well, they say that if drivers know their insurance will pay no matter what, they might not be as careful driving. And that could cause more accidents and more injuries, which would then put bigger strain on the whole healthcare system.
So it's like, if you know you're protected, you take more risks.
Yeah, it's called a moral hazard. And it happens in other types of insurance, too, not just car insurance. It's complicated, and both sides have good points.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe we don't know for sure about healthcare costs and no fault. But You mentioned something before about car insurance and the legal system, like how they're connected.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, no-fault systems, they're made to reduce lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
So with fewer lawsuits, it's easier and faster to handle claims and get people the money they need.
Makes sense. So the courts wouldn't be so bogged down with all those cases.
Right, exactly. That's one argument for no fault. The courts could run more efficiently. But on the other hand, what about people who deserve to sue but can't because of these no-fault rules?
Yeah, that's not fair. Like, what if they have serious injuries that will affect them for a long time?
That's a big concern for sure. It's all about trying to find a balance, you know? On one side, you have saving money and making things run smoothly. And on the other, people's right to sue and get what they deserve.
Right. It's complicated. Wow, it's crazy how car insurance, which seems pretty basic, can lead to all these bigger issues.
It really shows how everything is connected, you know? Choices we make about one thing, like car insurance, can have huge effects on other things.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
We've learned all about no fault and at fault, looked at real examples, and even talked about the big picture stuff. Now, what do you think the perfect car insurance system would be like? If you could design it, what would it do?
That's a great question. It would definitely be something to think about carefully. Like, would you want a system where everyone's medical bills are covered no matter what? Even if that meant higher costs for everybody.
Yeah. Or would it be better to have that individual accountability, where people can sue, even if that meant some people couldn't afford the costs of a lawsuit?
It's tough. No easy answer. Probably the best system would be somewhere in the middle, I think.
Yeah.
One that's fair, gets people the money they need, but also makes people drive responsibly and shares the costs fairly.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today. As we've seen, car insurance is not just about paying your bill every month. It's a big system with a lot of moving parts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
That wraps up another insightful episode of the Deep Dive Credit Podcast, brought to you by Elite Credit Solutions, your go-to resource for affordable credit repair across the United States. We appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you found the information valuable and empowering. If you're ready to take control of your financial future, don't hesitate to reach out to us at 813-317-6776. Additionally, don't forget to like today's podcast, share with your friends on social media, follow us, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in tune with future updates. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep striving for excellence in your credit journey.